right. Why don't we go ahead and get started? So welcome to the Society for Digital Mental Health's webinar. I am really pleased today to have David Silk, who is the Managing Director for the Peterson Health Technology Institute. Before helping to launch PHTI, David had a long career he was the global marketing lead for healthcare and life sciences with Google, and then with several other companies, and then left to start the Peterson Health Technology Institute, which is an independent nonprofit that analyzes and reviews digital therapeutics. And recently, just a few weeks ago, they released their findings for depression and anxiety. So today's format is going to be a little bit different. So David's going to give a kind of a brief talk, and then we'll follow that up with kind of a fireside chat where I'll ask him a few questions to elaborate on issues that I think are important and interesting to our membership, and then we will open it up for questions. And there's a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please, as we go along, feel free to put in questions there, and we'll spend the last 15 or 20 minutes going through those. So David, I will turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me. Really excited to share a bit about our most recent report. And as Dr. Mohr said, please ask any questions. Hopefully we'll have sort of an interactive second half. For those of you who don't know about PHTI, we're an independent nonprofit organization. What our goal is really to provide information that helps purchasers to make smart investment decisions in digital health. And what that means for us is that they are purchasing technologies that help improve healthcare and that lower costs. As Dr. Mohr mentioned, we released our most recent report on virtual solutions for depression and anxiety on May 20th. These take roughly 7 or 8 months to produce. And so, we try to produce a sort of very thorough and comprehensive report. And I'll sort of try to give you the highlights today, and then we can sort of course, follow up and hope you will read the complete report. As part of our sort of mission, as part of our independence, everything we produce is available free. It's publicly available at phti.org. So, if anyone would like to read the complete report after the webinar, you can find it there. Just a bit about PHTI. This was our 4th report. We aim to really provide information on topics of interest to purchasers. When we say purchasers, we think about employers, health plans, and of course payers as well. And so we try to release information in areas that they are focused on. We covered so far diabetes, virtual PT, hypertension management, and in the second half of this year, we will cover opioid use disorder as well as GI disorder. We also put out some additional content beyond our assessments, and so we've begun to wade into the AI space, talking about ambient scribes, and we'll be providing some forward-looking guidance around performance-based contracting for digital health in the second half of the year as well. Just a bit about how we operate, what we do, who's involved. So we have really 2 phases, but we have a topic selection process that's really heavily involved with a wide variety of folks. We have a digital health collaborative we engage with. We consult with clinical experts, digital health experts. We have a large partner network that you engage with, and we have a group called the Purchaser Advisory Council. That includes about 45 of the nation's largest health plans and employers. And they also help us by saying, hey, this is an area we're looking at. This is something we're focused on. We want to be providing information that's useful and valuable to them. And so we take that into consideration as we assess whether we should conduct a report in an area. Once we get into our assessment process, it actually becomes a little bit more of a closed box. We engage with patients, we engage with the digital health companies, we engage with a number of conflict-free clinical advisors who help advise us and help us to understand how do these technologies fit in with the standard of care. We also have a number of partners that help us perform the actual work. We do a systematic literature review. We conduct a budget impact model. And we do a whole bunch of primary research about the technologies themselves. So at the end of the day, we synthesize this all into a series of recommendations. And we usually produce recommendations at a category level. And so you'll see here we did the same. We either recommend them for broad adoption. We think that they maybe need further evidence generation, that maybe there's limited evidence, or maybe we're not sure if they're ready for broad adoption yet. And then there are certainly some technologies where we feel like they're not ready for adoption yet, and need some continued development. Obviously, our stoplight graphics get a lot of attention, but as I mentioned, these reports are long. They're purposely comprehensive. 70 to 100 pages or so with an appendix that will put anyone to sleep, I can promise you. And so while the recommendations get a lot of attention, there's really a lot of content and substrate in the report. And again, encourage folks who are interested to sort of download and read the complete report. So let's switch now to sort of our most recent assessment, which was on depression and anxiety. I don't think I need to tell anyone in the sort of world that or in the webinar today any of these statistics. But obviously, we looked at depression and anxiety. It's a huge burden of disease in the U.S. It carries a significant cost, both depression and anxiety, in direct medical costs for folks who have those conditions or experiencing symptoms of those conditions. The good news, I would say, the good news on this is that there actually are treatments that are available. The psychotherapy, medication, or both have been proven to be quite successful. The challenge we face is that there are many barriers to care. Patients don't have access to providers. There are long wait times. There's significant costs often associated. And in certain areas, there's just not availability of providers who can treat this condition. It's treated by, as you all know, both primary care physicians and a variety of mental health professionals. And so, in certain cities, I happen to be in New York, there's a large number of mental health providers, but many of them don't take insurance. In other places, there are very few mental health providers. The other thing I would say is because this is, because depression and anxiety are experienced by different types of patients in so many different types of ways, we spent a lot of time engaging with patients. We partnered with multiple research groups. We had both focus groups and individual patients to really understand the patient experience here and understand and help that to inform sort of the decisions and recommendations we were making throughout the report. So switching over for a moment into what do these virtual solutions do? So at a basic level, most of the virtual solutions, or I should say all the virtual solutions we evaluated, do two or more of the following four things, if you will. Almost all of them, in fact, I believe all of them, include an assessment or care planning process. Sometimes that can be done by a provider outside of the context of the digital solution, but most of them have some sort of intake and potentially even what we might term a triage process. All solutions we evaluated have digital content. These are primarily CBT-based modules. They're on demand. They can be accessed sort of when a patient wants to access them. Sometimes they're short, sometimes they're long. The way that the patient experiences them varies significantly between solutions, but the bottom line is that all of the solutions allow for some degree of engagement around digital content and learning that is done sort of on a patient's own time. A number of the solutions include a coaching and engagement component. This is actually not a therapeutic delivery, but in fact, motivational messaging or other types of encouragement that's delivered either via an AI bot or some automated mechanism, or actually via a human. And that's designed to encourage patients to do their work, to provide an accountability partner. And we actually saw that this had a meaningful impact on completion rates. And the last piece is really therapy. Many of the solutions offer teletherapy. Some even offer an in-person therapy, and these are one-on-one sessions with a licensed professional. And so, if you think about, not all of the solutions offer this, but many of the solutions allow for patients to access therapy online, and some even have the ability to prescribe and manage medications as well. And so, like, the combination of these four components really determine the type of solution that we were looking at. But these are sort of the basic pieces of it, sort of how it works, if you will. We looked at 15 companies throughout our assessment. We looked at, and then we bucketed them into really three broad categories. The first one is that self-guided solutions. These are sort of the digital content or digital content plus coaching, sort of motivational coaching only type solutions. The middle bucket is prescription digital therapeutics. Again, these are prescribed by a healthcare professional. They are used in conjunction with psychotherapy or talk therapy, and they are meant for sort of at-home practice. These are FDA cleared. And then the last one is the blended care solutions. And these are the solutions that include both that digital therapy component as well as sort of the teletherapy, one-on-one care that we were talking about. What you'll see is that actually a number of companies offer solutions in more than one of these categories. So they may offer one set of solutions to a large employer and a different set of solutions to a small employer. They may offer one package of solutions as an EAP replacement and a different package of solutions as sort of a supplement to their traditional EAP. And so these are sold and bought in a lot of different ways. But at the end of the day, there are really three basic types of solutions that are seeking to address really that mild to moderate category of patients. What do we look at to really understand these solutions? Well, to understand the solutions, we really looked at the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7. We looked at clinically meaningful improvements in PHQ-9 and GAD-7, and we set what the clinically meaningful improvement was at 5 points for depression and at 4-point reduction for anxiety. We also looked at a number of secondary outcomes, a number of additional measures, and we'll talk a little bit about those. Of particular note is engagement. And just to comment on the broader space, this was a large space relative to some of the other areas we've looked at. There were a large number of studies. We looked at over 5,000 studies to begin with. We narrowed those down to 103 studies. Believe it or not, we'd read all 103 studies. And really, that included comparative evidence, real-world evidence, company-submitted data, and a whole variety, posters, a whole variety of sort of evidence types. And so we really tried to get a comprehensive view of this space in order to make our recommendations and conclusions. So how did they do? Let's start with self-guided solutions. The good news is that self-guided solutions actually delivered clinically meaningful improvements on both anxiety and depression, particularly for individuals who are not receiving psychotherapy. So in this case, if you look at even the starting PHQ-9 and GAD-7s, it shouldn't be surprising for folks who are not in psychotherapy or not currently receiving usual care, they were at a higher starting point and had a more significant reduction. And so we saw roughly 7 points of improved PHQ-9 score for depression, which is roughly 3.9 points of reduction, greater than the control arm. And for anxiety, we actually saw a 4.6% reduction, 4.6 point reduction, which is really 2.3 more than the control. And we saw in these studies, the digital interventions met that clinically meaningful threshold in 6 of the 7 studies for depression and in 2 of the 3 studies for anxiety. So we had a high degree of confidence that this stuff really works, particularly for patients who were not receiving any other therapy. For patients with usual care, not surprisingly, the effects were a little more moderate. The patients with usual care, when this was added to usual care, improved by 4.6 points over baseline for depression, and they improved about 3.5 points over baseline, or 1.4 points over control on anxiety. Again, shouldn't be surprising, and very good news that these solutions can offer symptomatic relief for both patients who aren't receiving care, and for patients who might otherwise be receiving care. Both of this sort of digital self-guided content seems to be effective. Looking at the prescription digital therapeutics, we actually saw 3 large, well-designed studies that looked at the PDTs, and what we found was actually their score was their improvement score was actually even greater than some of the standalone digital content. How prescription digital therapeutics are used, how much they are used is sort of a hotly debated topic, as I'm sure everyone on the call knows right now. In 2015, starting January 1st, CMS established 3 new payment codes. The payment rates are still coming out. We expect them to be, or let's just say that the publicly available information on the pricing for these PDTs is between $200 and $400. And so that's what we used when we did our budget impact modeling. But again, strong clinical results on the prescription digital therapeutic side. On the blended care solutions side, there was actually a lot less data, and so what we ended up having to do was look at, because there was limited comparative data, what we really had to look at was against control arms across the entire study and across all of our studies. And what we found was that actually when you looked at the control arms, that these blended care solutions achieved even greater impact than sort of the self-guided solutions on both anxiety and depression, and relative to both no psychotherapy or usual care. And so we have some level of confidence that these solutions, because they're single arm, we think that this was sort of the best we could do to evaluate them. We believe that these solutions offer a lot of symptom relief for patients, and think that they are likely to be quite beneficial. Flipping over to the cost side for a moment, when we look at the costs avoided by the improvements that one can find in both the PHQ-9 and GAD-7, across all 3 categories, you see significant avoidance of healthcare spending. So on the self-guided solutions, you see a significant savings there, even more so on the blended care solutions. And to the right, you see roughly what our estimated price of these categories are. Note that the self-guided solutions are usually charged on a per member per month basis across the entire population. Prescription digital therapeutics, we believe, will be paid for between $200 and $400, and the estimated price of the blended care solutions includes actually both a per member per month cost of as high as $6, with costs associated with utilization as well. So that should give you a little bit of a preview of sort of where we're going in terms of sort of what we anticipate the cost to the system to be. So notably, both self-guided solutions and prescription digital therapeutics save money on a 1 million member plan in a commercial environment. Because of the model that blended care solutions are currently using to to charge that includes both a per member per month fee that's rather high for all members, as well as a sort of utilization-based additional fee, it creates a large sort of gap for them to cover. And actually, the blended care solutions actually increase net healthcare spend because they charge essentially an access fee for all members. I think it's important to remember this sort of model estimates a change in overall healthcare spending, and it includes, the cost for people who use virtual depression and anxiety solutions and those who do not. And so, I think, our goal here for the budget impact model is to provide guidelines on, roughly what these things will likely mean from a budgetary impact perspective. For a million member plan, a hypothetical million member plan, and I think the important thing is that in any negotiation between an innovator and a employer or a health plan, that they really try to calibrate these to the specific population that they're examining. These are designed to sort of provide guidance. It's not certainly designed to provide a sort of specific number for any plan or any group of plans. So where does this leave us? So across the self-guided solution category, we thought there were positive results across the clinical, economic, and sort of the overall results. And we felt that there was strong evidence to support broader adoption, particularly for folks who are not otherwise accessing therapy. We felt the same for prescription digital therapeutics. We felt like there was strong evidence to support broader adoption, and we felt like it really could be a valuable addition for providers who are already providing some sort of talk-based therapy. And then blended care solutions is a bit of a mix. And, this is really where the market is going right now. And these are really the solutions that folks are spending a lot of time contemplating at sort of the large employer set. We felt that the clinical effectiveness results were strong, but we had a little less certainty about those because of the study design, because there was very little comparative literature in that space. Obviously, we just walked through that because of the sort of current charge model for these solutions, they actually increased net healthcare spending significantly. And so overall, we gave them sort of a yellow, and which basically means, we think that there's some indication of positive clinical outcomes. And we think there's some way that there's probably a way to get to a positive economic outcome as well. We're just not there right now. And so thinking carefully on how we bring these solutions in, how we target them, what the cost and charge model is for those type of solutions is really important. And then, again, just to sort of close things out, we think that there's really a lot of opportunity in this space. We think there's an opportunity to increase evidence generation. There's obviously a number of gaps, a number of areas, particularly in the blended care solutions, how folks get from one level of care to another. What are the triage processes that need to really be better understood? Engagement plays a huge role in this. I don't need to tell anyone on the call that, if someone is not engaging with a solution, it's not very valuable. And so engagement plays a huge role, and that's an area of focus. And then we really need to make sure that we're figuring out, how do we efficiently deliver this care? Blended care solutions offer a great solution for some, but digital solutions may be sufficient for others. And how do we make sure we're getting the folks the right care that they need so they can get access to care quickly, get better quickly? That's sort of an area that I think we need to continue to explore. And that's an area that both innovators and purchasers can come to the table and work through together. So that's sort of just a quick overview and summary. I will stop sharing. I will hand it back over to Dr. Mohr, and we can engage in some questions.
Great, thank you so much. That was a great talk, and just a an incredible, I mean, I think this is going to be incredibly useful to the field. So thank you. I guess just to start, so you selected 15 companies and there are hundreds of them out there. So can you just say a few words about how you selected those?
Sure. No, it's we try to be very thoughtful about who we're including, and we want to be fair to everyone. We begin by looking at a number of sort of external and internal resources to sort of identify a huge number of companies. One of the things we've heard from purchasers is that they really want us to review companies that can support their entire population. We've heard that there's almost nothing more embarrassing to them than signing on a new provider, announcing it to the whole company, and having that provider fold a year or 3 months or later. So we have a number of criteria that we try to look at to make sure that they are sufficiently mature to be able to handle a large employer. I always, for better or for worse, I always think about Delta Airlines in my head. I don't know why, but that's sort of how I think about it. Can they handle a population the size of Delta Airlines? Once we get into that, then we actually talk to every company. We reach out to every company. We say, you're under consideration. We'd like to learn more about you. And so we begin with usually a broader set and we narrow it down as we begin to focus our report. The goal here is really to tell purchasers, here's a set of companies that we think could meet your needs. And that's why we group them into categories, because we want to sort of say, here's a set of companies that can meet your needs. Here's the sort of mechanism of action behind these companies. Other companies may offer that same mechanism of action, and you should sort of consider them potentially in that bucket. And then we really do our homework. One of the things we spend a lot of time with the companies. 14 out of the 15 companies in this report engaged with us. 10 of the companies submitted data, and that really helps us to understand the companies and really try to create an apples to apples versus an apples to orange comparison. It's not it's something we spend a lot of time doing, and something we spend a lot of time with the companies, really trying to understand them so that we can really put the right ones in the report. And it's an area where folks come back and forth, and we spend a lot of time, a lot of time discussing.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. So another thing I wanted to ask about is, so this review was done at the category level, and I know some of your previous reviews actually reviewed, it looked like some individual companies. And can you say a little bit about what the decision was to review at the category level? And
Sure. Yeah, we've traditionally either looked at approaches or categories. What we try to do is group companies into a similar, mechanism of action. I spent time in pharma, so that's like the nomenclature that
Yeah.
works with me. And so what we try to say is, like, how do these companies work? And we try to bucket them into sort of saying, how do they work? And because, digital health is a developmental area, because we wouldn't expect every company to have exhaustive research, we sort of look at the core components and we sort of say, if you have this sort of similar thing, it probably works similarly across companies. It's not to say it always does, and individual companies obviously have their own special sauce that makes their solution more or less effective. But from a purchaser perspective, we try to say, all right, if you're looking for a solution, let's just take this. If you're looking for a fully automated solution to help with mild to moderate anxiety, what is the broad consideration set you should look at? And so we try to sort of bucket things that way. We also want to be fair to companies, and we understand that products change rapidly in this space, and so when we assign sort of our results and sort of our recommendations, we want to be fair to those companies as well. We do provide a lot of individual level company information throughout the report, just not that hard rating. And so we do features and other things to try to help purchasers to understand the differences. But that's sort of how we generally approach the space.
All right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And you talked a little bit about, how, how you engage with payers, with with self-insured employers. And I'm wondering, where are you thinking PHTI sits in kind of the ecosystem of digital mental health or digital therapeutics? What role are you hoping to play?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I try to explain what I do to, my parents, I often say, my, my mom's actually a psychologist, so I try. This report was actually uh, close, very
So
close.
she was a reviewer.
It was closely monitored, but let's just say that. But I think of us as our goal is to be an independent voice in this space. And I think that independence is really important. We don't take money from anyone. We're fully funded. We don't have members, and we're not required to sort of serve any interest other than the interest of really the patient and the health system at large. And so, we see that as we saw that as a gap. That's sort of the origin story of PHTI, and that's the role we would like to continue to play. We obviously engage with a lot of different stakeholders, as you said, self-insured employers, uh, you know, purchasers across the spectrum, the federal government, and sort of in the evolving landscape of sort of the regulatory environment and the sort of the entire health ecosystem is obviously changing. And so, I think where we comfortably sit is as an independent external reviewer, providing guidance to those looking to make purchasing decisions around digital health technology.
And how have you seen, like, this one, this report is a few weeks old, so you probably haven't seen anything, but in general for your other reports, have you seen how payers or companies are using them? What
Yeah, so one of the things we try to do, and is really get out there and share the information that we found.
Mhm.
And we get a lot of very positive feedback from purchasers, from companies, and to sort of say thank you for helping us to understand this space. This has been helpful and useful in our negotiations. We've had folks I think a lot of the questions that we encourage folks to ask have been integrated into RFIs and sort of other types of sort of digital health purchasing processes. And so we do hear a lot of positive feedback from the community around the usefulness. It's certainly an area that I think we we spend a lot of time thinking about, and we would certainly love for um, uh, that to continue to grow, and the importance of this and the role that it plays in that purchasing process for both employers, purchasers, and others to increase. But we've been pretty happy with the reception so far.
Good. Yeah, no, and I certainly hope it doesn't increase. So let me shift gears a little bit. You talked about, you mentioned that engagement is, if people don't use it, it's not going to help, and that is, uh, I think a well-known challenge in the field. So what did you see in terms of engagement when you did these reviews, and what can you tell people developing these kinds of tools or companies how to approach it or how to think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the great things we we get to do is we get to engage with a lot of clinicians and throughout the report. And one of our clinicians said to us, the best solution is a solution that someone uses at the end of the day. And that's sort of really what we should be focused on. There were 78 articles we looked at that measured engagement. There was a wide variety of sort of ways that engagement was measured: lessons completed, modules completed, sessions. Some of these solutions. One in particular called Miru Health has a really defined sort of length of their program, and so measurement around sort of program completion. And the tough thing, what I would say, is that we saw really a wide variety of sort of outcomes. Some had completion rates that were really high. We saw 70, 80, 90%. Others had really, really low, 25%. And I don't know what the sort of, meaningful dose of these are, if you will, but
Yeah.
it's probably more than, a quarter of the sessions completed. And the things we saw that we can sort of advise folks innovating in this space are that we did see that human coaches positively impacted engagement rates. in the AI world that we live in today, where everything's automated, we did see that actually having an accountability partner, someone who would call you up, encourage you, engage with you, was a key factor in folks completing sessions. On the flip side, I think it's important to remember, like, some of these are these clinical trial settings, right? This is probably the ideal. It's probably the ideal setting. That if we're only getting 25 or 30%, I think there's a lot of work to do there. We don't look at things like UX or UI or things like that. We just sort of bundle that all into sort of the overall clinical outcomes. But I imagine thinking about how do you continue to engage people, how do you bring folks in and retain them in the program, is a real opportunity for this space.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Real world patients are very different than research participants.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, so just I have a lot of questions I could ask, but I'll just close on this and then get to some of the questions that people are asking. So you mentioned coaches, and I'm wondering, when you described your blended care category, it sounded like that was mainly licensed clinicians, which obviously drives up costs. And we do see in the research that you can train peer specialists to manage these things, manage these kinds of treatments very well. Was Can you talk about that distinction in the blended care model and with respect to the budget impact analysis you did?
Absolutely. So, it didn't, what I'd say is the mix of clinician types in the blended care model didn't factor into the budget impact model beyond sort of what is the estimated cost of providing that care. But to your point, each of the blended care models, and this is back to the categories, right? The blended care models all offer some level of sort of one-on-one psychotherapy-like engagement, but it doesn't mean that they're all providing it the same way or doing it with the same frequency. And so, there are some companies that use that don't have access to do no prescribing. There are no psychiatrists. It's only LCSWs, and there are some that have psychologists and LCSWs, and there are some who have sort of all three. And that blend and that mix and how they work together, and really how they triage folks between that self-guided care and that sort of more costly one-on-one in-person care, is going to be a critical variable, both in their clinical effectiveness and in sort of the underlying cost structure and their flexibility in pricing. And so, absolutely a critical variable. And what we're seeing across the board here is that there is more and more feature parity between these solutions. They're offering a lot of similar stuff, particularly in the blended care side, but they all do have their own special sauce. They have matching algorithms, right, all around this engagement. How do you get folks to get right the mode of, this better than I do, but what we've heard is that the mode number of sessions for talk therapy is 1, right? And so how do you get beyond that? And so, they offer matching algorithms. They offer different ways of allowing patients and physicians or clinicians to express their preferences. And so there's a lot of individual company level special sauce, and we'll see how that plays out in terms of sort of the clinical and economic side.
Good. All right. I could keep asking questions here, but I'm going to jump to some of the audience questions. So the first one, does anyone track the impact of the report that the report has on product uptake, or the inverse, when these reports come out? I think that's probably a little finer point on the question I asked earlier.
Well, you sound like the CEO of my company. This is good. It's a good question. I appreciate it. No, the truth is, we track it in, I come from a sort of product and commercial development world. And so we track it in a little more of qualitative way than quantitative at this point. We do track number of mentions. We track how often these solutions are cited in articles about, our assessment is cited in articles about the companies. We track whether they're in, the sort of public space. We certainly have a list of emails and other inbounds that said this was so valuable for me to renegotiate with company X, or I really was able to incorporate X, Y, and Z guidance around pricing into my contract, or I ended this contract, or this gave me the justification to end a contract. That's not, our goal isn't to end contracts. Our goal is to disproportionately funnel money into things that work, right? And so, the long-winded answer is we don't have real hard metrics. The shorter answer is we have a strong reason to believe that these are being used, and we hope that there will be more public attribution to some of the assessments in the future.
Great. Yeah. The next question, I think probably a lot of people have. So do you, these digital therapy, there's a lot of churn in the market, a lot of new companies coming in. How frequently do you expect that you'll be revisiting these reports?
It's a great question. And, one of the things we've been trying to do is do a mix of sort of retrospective analyses and some forward-looking guidance, recognizing that all of these spaces are evolving very quickly. We have not done a revisit of a space yet. The first report we did was digital diabetes solutions, and we really focused on use of non-continuous glucose monitors. So there's a valid question about whether now, with the use of continuous glucose monitors, should we reevaluate and revisit that? And so we've been monitoring that space. The short answer to your question is we will revisit it as soon as there's new evidence to suggest that the findings in the report are out of date, or if there are new entrants that are sort of evolving or modifying the space in a way that we can say something valuable to add. It's not probably a 2-year cycle. It might be more like a 3-ish year cycle. We're obviously monitoring all of these spaces very carefully. Diabetes, given that it was the report reproduced the longest ago, is probably the closest to being re-looked at. But we expect there to be significant changes in this space, and so we'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah, there are already a lot of changes
Absolutely.
with generative AI, which I know hadn't really developed to the point that you could review it. So, all right. So another question here: did you, in your consultations or when you worked with people with lived experience, did you also interview caregivers or family members?
We did. There were a few. I don't know the actual. I can't off the top of my head the number, but there was both discussions of sort of caregivers in the context of patients speaking about their caregivers, and I believe there were a few caregivers we spoke with as well. We really do try to get as deep into that. The patient mindset to really understand, it's one thing to look at all the clinical evidence, but you really need to look at that both in terms of what does it mean at the individual clinician level and what does it mean at the individual patient level.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So in the report, are there trends emerging related to the types in this report or other reports? Trends emerging related to the types or levels of studies that are needed for products to demonstrate sufficient clinical and economic impact? I think this starts to get at kind of standards, evidence standards.
Well, I can tell you how we look at it. It doesn't mean that, from our perspective, comparative evidence is really important. When you look at conditions and many conditions have a self-resolution component. When you look at things like depression and anxiety, they're cyclical, there's some degree of self-resolution. You look at something like MSK, the same can be true. You sprain your ankle, it does get better on its own. Does it get better faster? And so really, in order to be able to evaluate the incremental value of these digital solutions, we really need comparative evidence. And so, that is sort of for us the most important thing we look at. The other thing about digital solutions is it's really hard to sort of blind them. It's really hard to not have folks opt into them. And so, if you do, a study of diabetic patients and you give, you give them a solution and that can help them improve their eating habits, let's say, and you say, do you want this solution? The folks who are going to say, yes, I want the solution, are interested in improving their eating habits and are more likely to accomplish the goal of improving their eating habits than those who don't. And so there's always this challenge in the digital health space with sort of the opt-in challenge or the study design challenge, and the best thing we can do in as a sort of community is to do comparative evidence to sort of combat that. Beyond,
Yeah, you're really talking about randomized controlled trials.
well, so I mean, sure, RCTs would be great, but like a prospective comparative trial is helpful. Understanding sort of a comparison to usual care, sort of having someone with usual care and then usual care plus the digital intervention.
Right.
Really being able to understand the incremental impact is really where we're often focused. There are also we look at single arm trials too. I'm not suggesting that that's, and we look at them very carefully, but that is really a really good prospective trial. It is really helps us to understand the space and helps purchasers to understand the space.
Next question. So what measures of engagement did you use? Activity logs, completion rates, can ignore the emotional and cognitive aspects of patient experience. So not all engagement is the same.
We and sort of per the previous question, we are often limited by what the studies report, right? And so the studies tended to be around those sort of metric-driven completion rates, and that tended to be mostly what was reported in the studies. This is an area where I think we as a group can do better, and so again, how do we improve the level of evidence and confidence we have in digital health? I think helping purchasers to really understand how to drive that engagement, what engagement works, how to partner with companies to drive engagement. If you're going to spend all this money on a solution, you want it to get to your employees or your plan members, and you want them to use it. And so, I think there's a lot of work to be done in the engagement space, and it's an area that particularly in this space, I think there's an opportunity.
Apologies, my Zoom dropped there for a moment.
Problem.
And I also lost all the questions. So, Lisa, do you want to? I mean, while we're
Sure.
waiting.
So we have another question here about the cost implications. So if you did consider cost implications with the role of adding coaches to promote engagement.
Yeah, we, a bit like our discussion of sort of different licensure levels. At the end of the day, the price of these solutions is the price of the solutions, and what they offer within that price is really up to them. And so we didn't look at sort of the underlying cost of delivery of care. We just really looked at the price to the end purchaser. But to your point, absolutely, anytime you get a human involved, right, it's going to be more expensive. And there's some suggestion from the evidence that that may be worth it in terms of sort of clinical and downstream economic impact.
All right. Another question here. Hopefully it wasn't asked while I've dropped. So the optimal business case for mental health solutions is addressing comorbidity with unmet mental health needs in the context of medical illness. I certainly hear a lot. Did you look at any of those subgroups and their use or benefit?
So we be careful how I answer this. We just like we are very aware that one of the key drivers of the cost associated with mental health materializes in other care, in other costs associated with other care. And we didn't look at specific subgroups in terms of our cost analysis. There were studies we looked at that broke down the impact on on groups with different types of conditions. The key there was if they broke out the results by those type of conditions as well. For instance, like we know there was a lot of comorbid conditions in some of the patient populations. What we didn't know is, was there a disproportionate effect on those patients as part of the trial? It's absolutely an area that we need to that needs to be explored more, and absolutely an area where I agree with the folks who are asking the question, where there may be significant opportunity for the deployment of these solutions.
Yeah. So, so folks, that we've gotten to the end of your questions, which gives me an opportunity to keep asking questions, but feel free to go ahead and put in any questions you have. So one of the things that's in your report is you talk, I think that it mentions that overwhelmingly the participants in the studies that were looked at are white women. And can you talk about what what your thinking is about that, and in particular, like what needs to be done both in the research as well as how payers should be thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had some vigorous debates about the gender divide in sort of the overall diagnosis rates. Is it a prevalence issue? Is it a diagnosis rate issue? And that sort of helped frame the sort of backdrop. The reality is that these were overwhelmingly primarily younger white women that we looked at, that these studies looked at. I think the reality is, when we think about access challenges, we think about rural challenges. We need to be focusing our solutions on digital solutions on testing in populations where there are access challenges. Not to say that younger white women don't have access challenges. They certainly do. But we need to make an explicit effort to make sure we're testing these solutions in sort of diverse populations. It's hard, and per the question previously, what is the type of study that we like to see? We do like to see testing in diverse populations, because we'd like to know whether it works, and we'd like the results to be broken out by a bunch of different subgroups as well. We would like to see, overall, we would just like to see more evidence, and I think we should be thinking particularly about populations like Medicaid and other populations there. Like these, it's really nice to have a set of solutions that we can say, we think these work, and these think these should be deployed broadly. And then the question now is, to whom and how? And I wish we had a bit more evidence to say, they should be, the to whom part. We didn't see any indication that these would not work outside of the sort of younger female population. But it would be really nice to be certain about that.
Yeah, I think that you kind of hit on it. I think that a lot of where I think a lot of the evidence, and certainly I see this in the work we've done, a lot of the evidence is generated by people that are who already have access to care. They're recruited in medical settings, and the Medicaid populations, rural populations, the people that are hard to access are precisely those that were, the greatest benefit to the population level benefit can occur. So I appreciate that. Another thing I really appreciated that as you were kind of in your talk that I appreciated was, you mentioned the importance of triaging patients who don't do better. Not everybody's going to do not everybody does well with any particular treatment, and digital mental health is no different. So what role do you see clinicians playing in this, particularly where it's unsupported?
I mean, I think that's, part of our, part of the idea behind the blended care solutions is that sort of that real ability to triage. You know, I think our hope is that in areas where there, like mental health, where there are provider shortages, having sort of more mild patients treated sort of asynchronously in a sort of in a manner that doesn't require high resources from limited, high use of limited resources is beneficial for everyone. It's beneficial for the patient. It's beneficial for the clinician, sort of that top of the license sort of model, and
Right.
allows individuals, who are providing care to provide care to those who need it most. Again, I think the devil, it really is in the details here in terms of how these function, how these solutions triage, what is their method for triaging, how do they allow for patient and physician preference. All of that is, varies a lot between these companies, and I think will be an important part of, whether they are successful in the long term, is how they are able to sort of effectively triage between the different levels of care.
Yeah. Huh. All right, just a few questions rolled in at the end, and we're almost at the top of the hour. But and one of the questions is kind of I think you've been talking about it a little bit earlier, like if there are similar outcomes across demographic groups, and if you could comment on that. And then another asking about whether stigma can be a large barrier to care and how stigma plays in these kinds of solutions.
I mean, absolutely. I think so. The first one is that we didn't see any evidence that these don't work in diverse populations, but we would have liked to see a lot more evidence that they do. And so in the studies that did test in rural populations, in sort of more diverse populations, there was no sort of meaningful difference in sort of the results. On the second question on stigma, there is, it certainly was brought up by the patients. And so as one of the ways, both like stigma and convenience, that digital or virtual interactions, whether that be one-on-one or sort of asynchronous, can be a valuable addition because it helps potential, from the patient's perspective, it can help reduce some of that stigma. The larger question about like how do we get folks to take action, how do we get folks to engage, I think part of the beauty of sort of the results is that these digital solutions, particularly the sort of digital first ones, if deployed broadly, if available widely, can help. Just knowing you have a resource can be helpful. And what I can tell you is that when companies shared data around pre and post implementation of the solution in terms of the number of folks who are taking advantage of this offering. And I will tell you that one of the reasons that the blended care solutions can be very expensive is because so many folks do take advantage of them. And such a large number of folks sort of enter the system, whether those folks are sort of paying out of pocket and receiving care in other ways or whatever, it does bring folks into the system in a way that's meaningful. And so that is a really positive outcome here that we saw, is that just the availability of these solutions gets folks to engage more with them. And that's nice.
Well, that's a good note to end on, and we are just past the top of the hour. So, David Silk, I really appreciate your taking the time out to talk with us about this report, and you know, I look forward to seeing seeing you again soon. Folks who are still on, if you haven't joined the Society for Digital Mental Health, there's a link in the chat. It's free. Please go ahead and join, and we will see you all soon. Thank you so much.
And thanks so much for having me.